Janet's breath was warm against his cheek, but her words cut colder than the IV dripping into his arm. It was never you, it was always your brother Michael. Jimmy couldn't even lift his head. The machines beeped steadily beside him, mocking him with every pulse he no longer wanted to keep. Years, 15 of them, flashed by in slow humiliation. Her birthdays he remembered, his she forgot, her rent he paid, his dreams she spent. And now, as he lay strapped to a hospital bed with one kidney gone, the truth finally landed, not in her apology, but in her confession. It hadn't been love, it had been convenience. She stood straight again, adjusted her hair, and without even waiting for him to reply, turned away. The door clicked shut like the final nail in the coffin. He wanted to cry, but even the salt had dried up. His eyes just burned quietly. He remembered when he first signed the donor paperwork, alone, still holding on to her words from that night. "I'll never forget what you did for me, Jimmy." He had believed her. He had thought love meant giving, and giving more. But now, with his chest tight and his vision dimming, Jimmy realized he hadn't been her partner, he had been her backup generator. Something she used in the dark, but never brought into the light. The pain in his abdomen was nothing compared to the one in his chest. His heart wasn't failing, but it was falling. Falling into a silence so deep it made the monitors fade. In that moment, he understood, he wasn't dying from illness, he was dying from knowing that the person he gave his life to had never seen him. He had died to be her home, and she had walked straight through him to reach someone else. As the monitors screamed, as nurses shouted, and as the ceiling turned to blur, Jimmy let go, and for once, he didn't fight it, but death, it seemed, wasn't the end. A jolt, a gasp, air surged into his lungs like fear, like thunder. His eyes flew open, and they weren't staring at hospital fluorescents anymore. They were staring at a white ceiling fan above a familiar dorm bunk. Jimmy shot upright, sweat drenched his back. The window next to him let in a sliver of campus morning light. He looked around wildly, posters on the wall, textbooks stacked carelessly, the smell of cheap noodles in the corner. He knew this room. He remembered this mattress. This was his second year of university. "No," he whispered, hand trembling as it reached for the phone on the desk. The date confirmed it. 14 years ago. And then the message came in, right on cue, from Janet. "After school tonight, can you help me get Michael to go see a movie?" His chest didn't hurt this time. It burned, but not with pain, with clarity. In the past, he had gone, smiled, played wingman, watched them fall in love while he stood in the shadows like a loyal fool. Not this time. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. A new fire coursed through him. "I can't, I have things to do, figure it out yourself." Send. He leaned back. This wasn't a second chance to fall for her again. This was a second chance to walk away, and maybe, just maybe, to walk toward someone else. He scrolled to Clara's number, the girl Janet always mocked, the one she called fake, the one whose shy smile had once made his chest feel something he never explored. He opened a new message. His fingers didn't hesitate this time. "Hey Clara, you free after class today?" He hit send. He stood up, walked to the mirror, and stared at the face that had once died for the wrong person. This time, he whispered, "I'm not dying for you." Jimmy stepped out of the dorm building and into the same late spring sunlight that once felt warm and exciting. Now, it felt like borrowed light, too bright for the shadows he carried inside. He adjusted the straps on his bag, glancing at students passing by, chatting, laughing, making plans for clubs and cafes. 14 years ago, he had walked this same path as a boy who believed in effort, in giving, in Janet. Now, every step he took was laced with memory, bitter, precise, unavoidable. He passed the bench near the courtyard where Janet had once cried about her roommates, and he had believed every word. The truth, she had fought with them because they didn't praise her enough. He remembered how she spun stories, always the victim, always needing saving. He remembered the time she accidentally left her wallet at home, and he ended up paying for her groceries, and then it became every week. Every moment replayed with sharp clarity, but what burned the most was that he had smiled through it all. He stopped outside the economics building, waiting for the first class of the day to start. Students gathered, but one person in particular caught his eye, Clara, standing by herself, a book clutched to her chest, her chestnut brown hair tied into a low bun. She looked exactly as he remembered, neat, quiet, a little awkward, and still invisible to everyone else. Janet used to sneer when Clara's name came up, calling her that tryhard with her tote bag full of library books. Back then, Jimmy had laughed along, thinking he was being loyal. But now, watching Clara adjust her glasses as she readjusted her bag, he realized she had been the only one who ever offered him kindness with no price. He walked over. "Hey," he said, his voice casual but sure. "Morning, Clara." She blinked up, clearly surprised. "Oh, hi, Jimmy, right?" "Yeah," he smiled. "I was wondering, you still go to the library after econ?" Her brows lifted slightly. "Usually. Yeah. Would it be weird if I joined you?" Now she really looked surprised. "I mean, no, not at all, I just didn't think you—" "I feel like I missed out on a lot of good company last semester," he said smoothly, trying to change that. She smiled softly, looking down for a moment. "Okay, sure." They walked to class side by side. He felt her glance at him once or twice, unsure what had changed. She'd find out soon enough, not through words, but through choices. Inside the classroom, he took the seat beside her. Around them, conversations blurred, but Jimmy wasn't listening to the present. He was watching the past walk by. Janet sat 2 rows ahead, already turned in her seat to talk to Michael, laughing too loudly. Back then, Jimmy had thought it was cute, her confidence, her brightness. Now, all he saw was performance. She wasn't laughing at Michael's joke, she was laughing because others were watching. The professor walked in, class began. Jimmy took notes carefully, remembering this topic would come up on the midterm. Last time, he had skipped the readings to help Janet move into her off-campus apartment. She didn't even unpack, he did it all while she FaceTimed a friend. After class, he turned to Clara. "Still up for the library?" She nodded. "I usually sit near the windows." He followed her across campus. She bought 2 coffees from a vending machine, 1 cream, 1 black. She handed him the black one without asking. "I remembered you drink it plain," she said with a small shrug. He stared at the cup for a second, then smiled. "Thanks." Back then, Janet never brought him anything, not water, not food, not warmth. Once, during his second dialysis round, he had passed out from hunger because she forgot to bring the lunch he'd asked for. She never apologized. She said, "Well, you should have reminded me." They found a quiet table. Clara unpacked her notebook. She studied with focus, occasionally brushing her bangs aside when they fell forward. No flirting, no games, just quiet effort. He leaned back, observing her for a moment. No makeup, no perfume. Her tote bag was worn at the corners. Her phone case had a crack in it. She had everything Janet didn't: modesty, substance, consistency, and yet, he had once ignored her for the one who made him feel needed, not seen. His phone buzzed. A message. "Janet. Where did you disappear to? We're all grabbing lunch, come." He locked the screen. Later that week, Jimmy walked past the admin office and paused. He remembered something. Last life, Janet had said her roommates bullied her. That was her excuse to make him pay 1,800 yuan per month for a solo apartment. But now, with a second chance, he checked the housing list. Sure enough, no complaint had ever been filed by her. No request for reassignment. Just another lie, one of many. He had drained his savings for her. Paid her rent, bought her medicine when she claimed to be too sick for campus clinics. She'd once cried that her parents wouldn't support her art classes. He'd borrowed money to cover it. And when he was recovering from his kidney surgery, she never came to the hospital. She just sent a text, "Hope it went okay, LMK when you're out." That same night, Clara had messaged asking if she could bring soup. He had ignored her. Now, walking back to the dorm, Jimmy opened his phone and typed, "Thanks for the coffee today. Want to study together again tomorrow?" Clara's reply came a minute later. "I'd like that." He smiled. Invisible loyalty. It had always been right in front of him. Janet may have been the spotlight, but Clara was the one who stayed when the lights went out. Jimmy's phone buzzed again. The sender? Janet. "Hey, can you help me convince Michael to go to a movie tonight?" He didn't even blink. The same wording, the same passive tone. In his last life, he had replied within seconds, eager to help, assuming it was just a friendly favor. He remembered waiting in line for their tickets while Janet whispered to Michael and giggled beside him. He remembered walking behind them, carrying the drinks, smiling through a hollow feeling in his chest. He remembered lying awake that night, wondering why his heart hurt, long before he knew why. This time, Jimmy didn't even open the message. He locked the screen, slid the phone into his pocket, and kept walking toward the library. Inside, he found Clara already seated by the window, her notebook open, sleeves rolled just past her elbows. The sunlight outlined her silhouette, soft and warm, like she belonged there. He approached quietly. "You always come early?" he asked, setting his bag down. Clara looked up, startled, then smiled. "Habit, I guess. Mornings are quiet." "I like quiet," Jimmy replied, sitting down, "and clarity." She gave him a curious glance, but didn't press. That was something he liked about her. Clara never asked for more than he offered. With Janet, everything was a demand disguised as affection. "Can you just pick that up for me, babe? Would you mind paying this month again? You're such a lifesaver, Jimmy." Back then, he used to glow when she said that. Now, he heard the manipulation under every syllable. The next day, he suggested they try a small cafe off campus, one that served fresh matcha and had glass windows perfect for studying. But that wasn't the only reason he chose it. He remembered exactly what day Janet usually passed by there on her way to her club meeting. Like clockwork, she'd take that route wearing her powder blue dress, pretending not to look through the glass, until she caught sight of something worth reacting to. This time, Jimmy made sure she'd find it. Clara sipped her tea quietly while she read. Jimmy leaned over to point something out in her notes, and she smiled up at him, close enough for the light to catch the amber in her eyes. It was natural, unforced, and right on cue, a shadow passed the window. "Janet." He saw her out of the corner of his eye, pausing, blinking in disbelief, and then smiling too quickly, too brightly. She entered a few minutes later under the pretense of, coincidentally, getting coffee. Jimmy didn't even look up as she walked by their table, but Clara noticed her tension instantly. "Was that Janet?" Jimmy nodded, his expression neutral. "Yeah, she just likes being seen." Later that evening, his phone rang. It was Michael. "Hey," his brother started, voice low. "Can I ask you something? Why are you treating Janet like this?" Jimmy leaned back in his chair. "Like what?" "You ignored her message. She said you ghosted her." "Ghosted her?" Jimmy repeated, a dry laugh escaping his lips. "You think I owe her something?" Michael hesitated. "I mean, she's always been there for you, right? I thought she liked you." Jimmy's voice turned ice cold. "She loved someone, all right, but it wasn't me." There was a pause on the line. Michael exhaled. "So, this is about Clara?" "This is about me," Jimmy replied. "For once." He hung up before Michael could say anything else. The next morning, he opened his budgeting app. The monthly 1,800 yuan transfer he had been making to Janet's account since first year was still scheduled for automatic payment. He cancelled it, then he sent her a message. "You'll need to figure out your rent this month. I won't be covering it anymore." Within 5 minutes, she replied. "Wait, what? Why? Are you okay?" "Perfectly," he typed back. "Just done with being useful." No reply. Load. That evening, Clara met him outside the library steps, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. "I tried a new place today," she said, offering one. "Less sugar." He took it gratefully. "Thanks." As they walked across campus, she finally asked, "Is everything okay? I heard you and Janet aren't talking anymore?" Jimmy stared at the path ahead. The question landed harder than he expected. For years, he'd given Janet everything: money, time, emotional weight. Cutting her off should have felt lighter. Instead, it felt like amputation, not because he missed her, but because of how much of himself he had tied to her value. "She never loved me," he said quietly. "I thought she did. I gave her everything because I believed she did." Clara slowed her steps. "So, what changed?" "I died," Jimmy said, without thinking. Then he looked at her. "Figuratively?" Clara didn't ask. She just nodded. They stopped by the lake. She sat on the grass, knees tucked to her chest. Jimmy followed, sipping the now cooling chocolate. "She once said you were fake," he said, not looking at her. "Called you a try-hard, said you were just trying to get attention." Clara blinked slowly. "I figured she didn't like me, but I didn't think you believed it." "I did," Jimmy admitted. "Back then." He turned to look at her. "But you were never fake. You were just real in a way she couldn't understand." Clara smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. The next morning, Janet showed up outside his dorm. She didn't knock, just stood near the front steps, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Can we talk?" she asked when he came down. "I have class," he replied. 5 minutes, she insisted. He gave her 2. "You're pulling away from me," she said, her voice smooth. "Is this because I asked you to help with Michael?" He raised an eyebrow. "You asked me to set up a date with my brother." "It wasn't a date, you always had a way of making it sound innocent." She stiffened. "I used to think it was my fault," he said, "that I wasn't enough, that if I tried harder, gave more, loved deeper, you'd finally see me. And now? Now I see you." Her face faltered for the first time. "You're really ending this?" "It never started," he said, and walked away. He didn't see her again for a week. Clara asked him out for noodles on Friday. He agreed, and this time, he was the one who arrived first. She found him already seated, waiting, 2 bowls already ordered. They talked about everything except Janet. Clara told him about her childhood cat, about the time she almost failed her math exam and cried under a stairwell. He laughed more than he had in years. Janet was still in his contact list. That night, he deleted it. No final message, no closure. Only the quiet certainty that he didn't need any. Jimmy jolted upright in bed, chest heaving, sweat pooling along the collar of his shirt. The walls of the dorm looked normal, but for a moment, he wasn't in college anymore. He was back in that hospital bed. The machines beeped in tandem with his fading breath. The pain wasn't just physical, it was betrayal made flesh. He remembered the echo of nurses whispering just outside the curtain. His vitals are dropping. Did she leave? No, she's still scrolling. And there she was, Janet. Not crying, not praying, not even looking at him. Just thumbing through her phone, adjusting her lipstick through the front camera, waiting for the last obligation to end. He covered his face with both hands and tried to breathe through the ache. The memories weren't dreams, they were visits from a life he hadn't left behind. His body may have reset, but the weight hadn't. A knock on the door pulled him out of the spiral. It was Clara, holding 2 paper cups and a familiar concerned expression. "You okay?" she asked softly. "You weren't in class today." "Headache," Jimmy lied. "Didn't sleep." She handed him the tea anyway. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks." He forced a smile. "Maybe I haven't." They sat in silence, the kind she never rushed to fill. Her presence didn't demand performance, she wasn't watching for cracks, she was waiting to hold them together. He admired that, and yet, sometimes her patience hurt more than Janet's cruelty. Because he didn't feel like he deserved it. That night, he didn't sleep again. This time the dream wasn't just of the hospital, it was of Clara, from the past life, standing at the edge of the ward's hallway. He had ignored her message, something about bringing soup. She had stood there a while, then turned and walked away. He woke up in tears. The next evening, Clara found him alone outside the campus library, staring at the blank sky. "You're where else?" she said gently, sitting beside him. "I'm always somewhere else," he murmured. She waited. He didn't plan to say it, it just slipped out like blood from a wound. "In another life, I gave everything to someone who didn't care. And it killed me." Clara stiffened slightly, but didn't interrupt. "I mean that literally, Clara. I worked 2 jobs, paid her bills, donated an organ, thought if I just kept giving, one day she'd look at me like I mattered." His voice cracked. "And she never did, not once. The last thing she ever gave me was the truth, that she had always loved my brother. She told me that while I was dying." Clara's eyes welled, but she stayed quiet. She simply reached out and held his hand, fingers light but steady. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not," Jimmy said, blinking fast. "Because now I get to see the difference. You look at me like I'm real." Clara's grip tightened. The next day, Jimmy saw Janet outside his lecture hall. She looked thinner. Her hair wasn't curled. Her usual effortless glow was missing. "Jimmy," she said quickly, latching onto his sleeve. "I fainted last night. I think it's serious. Will you come with me to the clinic?" He didn't blink. "Ask Michael." She looked offended. "He's busy. I thought maybe—" "I'm not giving you my time," Or my blood, or my kidney, Jimmy said coldly. Janet froze. Why would you say that? What are you talking about? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You won't get a second kidney from me this time. She stared at him, completely still, the color drained from her face. Wait, she murmured. What did you just say? Jimmy didn't answer. He simply turned and walked into the classroom. Janet didn't show up for a few days after that. But when she returned, something had changed in her gaze. Her eyes flickered constantly, analyzing him. During lunch hour, she'd pass by his usual bench. If he turned one way, she'd mirror it. She started bringing up events they hadn't yet experienced, as if fishing for reactions. She was testing him. She suspected. Clara noticed too. She's watching you more than usual, she said one afternoon as they studied together. I know. Should I be worried? Jimmy looked at Clara and saw worry, not jealousy. The good kind, the kind that wanted to protect, not possess. No, he replied. But I should have been worried about you more last time. Clara smiled softly, brushing her thumb over the edge of her notebook. We're here now. A week later, Janet showed up again, this time seated quietly in the back of the lecture hall. She didn't speak, just stared, watched. Jimmy ignored her. But inside, it stirred something he didn't want to feel. The rage hadn't died, it had gone dormant. When Janet had told him, in that hospital bed, that she had always loved Michael, he had thought it was the final knife. But now, with her back in his life, fragile, desperate, watching, it felt like a shadow returning, like a sickness trying to slip through a healed wound. He wanted to scream at her, to grab her and shake her and ask, why didn't you just leave me? Why did you use me until there was nothing left? But Clara would appear again, and in her soft voice and warm hands, Jimmy would remember. Anger may be justified, but it doesn't heal. Only choosing something different does. So he started choosing Clara, every day. Small things, bringing her snacks, reading her notes, sitting next to her during every break, asking about her mother's health. She noticed, but never asked for more. She just responded with gentleness, and that gentleness became his anchor. But Janet didn't stop. One evening, she shows up outside his dorm with tear-stained cheeks and a half-written apology letter. Please, she whispered, holding the page forward, I didn't know what I was doing back then. Jimmy stared at her. That's the problem, Janet, you never knew, and worse, you never tried to. She folded the paper, hand trembling. Can't we just start again? He shook his head. You started with Michael, you ended with me. There's no again. She stepped back, swallowing her pride. You're different. Jimmy's jaw clenched. Good. Later that night, Clara found him on the rooftop. You're exhausted, she said, sitting beside him. I'm trying not to be angry, he admitted. It's okay if you are. I don't want to be her reflection, he said. She carried selfishness like a second skin. I want to be free of it. You are, Clara said simply. Because you see it now. He looked at her, really looked. You're the only reason I don't fall back in. Then let me keep holding you, she whispered. And he nodded. That night, for the first time in weeks, he slept without dreaming. Jimmy had been watching the calendar for weeks. June 14th. It was etched into his bones, the day Michael died in the last life. A car accident outside campus at exactly 3:16 p.m. Jimmy had gotten the call while in the middle of work, racing through traffic to reach a brother already gone cold. That moment had torn something loose inside him. Not just grief, but guilt. Because it wasn't just Michael's death, it was the spiral that followed, the debt, the dialysis, Janet's silence, and then, the kidney. So this time, he prepared. He cancelled his schedule, followed Michael from the moment he left his dorm, sat with him through lunch, made excuses to keep him inside lecture halls, but still, fate crept in like a crack in glass. At 3:03 p.m., Michael received a message. A student needed help with a thesis proposal, just across the campus parking lot. Jimmy felt the world shift in his chest. Don't go, he said. Michael paused. Why? Just a feeling, Jimmy replied tightly. Michael laughed. You sound like Mom. I'll be 5 minutes. Jimmy wanted to shout, to pull him back by force, but instead, he followed. They were halfway across the parking lot when the sound came, a shrill scream of tires, a flash of red, the sudden blur of metal. Jimmy turned instinctively, but he wasn't fast enough. The small delivery truck clipped the corner, spinning wildly. Michael froze. Jimmy lunged. His body collided with his brother's, shoving him hard to the side, just far enough that the truck missed his chest but clipped his leg. Michael cried out, crashing into the concrete, and Jimmy tumbled beside him. The world roared, then fell silent. Sirens. Blood. Panic. In the hospital, Jimmy sat rigid in the corner of the emergency room, hands bloodied from the scrape of asphalt. The doctors said Michael had a fractured tibia, possible internal bruising, but his vitals were stable. He would live. That would have been relief. But then came Janet. She stormed into the waiting room, wild-eyed and breathless, pushing past nurses like a woman possessed. Her gaze locked onto Michael in the stretcher, and she rushed to his side, gripping his arm. "Michael, are you okay?" she whispered, brushing hair from his face. "Please, you're okay now, right? You're not going to die." Jimmy stared. That voice, that desperation, it wasn't new. It was the same way she'd clung to Michael at his funeral in the last timeline, sobbing as if she had lost the love of her life. Clara arrived moments later, eyes wide with worry, carrying a thermos in both hands. Jimmy met her gaze and stood up. "He's going to be all right," he told her softly. "Thanks for coming." But his eyes drifted back to Janet, still beside Michael's bed, holding his hand like it was tethered to her soul. "She's still in love with him," he muttered under his breath. Hours passed, X-rays, observation, IV drips. The doctor returned with a full report. "He'll be fine, fractured shin bone, few cuts, nothing life-threatening, but..." The doctor paused, scanning the chart. "We noticed something interesting in the abdominal scans. Michael has one kidney." Janet froze. Her eyes widened. "What?" Jimmy turned slowly, arms folded. "One kidney?" she echoed, the words tumbling from her mouth. "No, that can't be. That doesn't make sense." The doctor nodded. "His left kidney is underdeveloped, possibly congenital. Functionally, he's fine, but biologically, yes, he's living with just one." Janet staggered backward. Jimmy stepped closer, his voice low and precise. "So you see, it was never him." She looked up, trembling. "But I didn't take it from you this time. I didn't. I swear I didn't." Jimmy's eyes bore into hers. "That's right, because I was already one step ahead." Her knees buckled. She dropped into the nearest chair, hands shaking as if trying to rewind time with her fingertips. The memories hit her like a hailstorm, the hospital staff's confusion after Jimmy's death, the sudden realization her savior was gone, the silence from Michael when she tried to thank him. She had assumed it was the brother, because that was what she wanted to believe. "You knew?" she choked. "You knew all along?" Jimmy didn't blink. "From the day I woke up." She stared at him, something unraveling behind her eyes. The shock gave way to horror, then to something deeper, fear. "You're not just angry," she whispered. "You're different." He stepped forward, close enough for only her to hear. "You played chess with a pawn who thought he was a king. But this time, I brought the board." Janet's lips quivered. Are you saying you came back?" Jimmy didn't answer, but his silence said more than any word could. Janet turned to look at Michael, peaceful, unaware, lucky to still be breathing. Jimmy's voice was quiet now. "You spent years loving someone who never looked your way, and when I gave you everything, you let me die believing I was a placeholder. I won't be that again." Janet couldn't speak, couldn't move. She simply sat there, crushed beneath the weight of knowing this wasn't just a second chance for her. It was a reckoning. He left her there, sitting outside Michael's ward, her hands still stained with borrowed grief. In the hallway, Clara waited, her eyes searching his face. "How's he doing?" "He'll recover," Jimmy replied. She nodded, exhaling. Then, without prompting, she offered the thermos. "You should eat something, you're shaking." Jimmy took it. Warmth radiated through his hands. In the small gesture, something anchored him again. He looked down the corridor once more. Janet was still there, frozen, silent, unraveling. And for the first time, Jimmy didn't feel like her victim. He felt like her consequence. It began on a Tuesday. Clara had just handed in her paper and was walking across the quad when her phone buzzed, then buzzed again and again. By the time she looked, there were 12 messages, group chats, notifications, mentions on the university forum. Her heart sank. She clicked the first thread. A post by @TruthSeeker999. Meet Clara, the campus coquette who stole her best friend's boyfriend. The images followed. Photos of Jimmy and Clara walking together, eating together, her laughing, leaning into him, all heavily edited, oversaturated, and disturbingly intimate. Then screenshots, fake messages, edited timestamps. One even read, "Clara, she doesn't deserve you, let her suffer." It was a lie, every single one of them. Within minutes, it exploded. Disgusting. Campus homewrecker. She used to pretend she was sweet. Clara stood frozen in front of the humanities building, phone trembling in her hands, as whispers began to rise around her. When Jimmy found her, she was curled up on the bench outside the dorm, her phone face down on her lap, silent tears cutting tracks down her cheeks. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "I never even said those things." Jimmy didn't ask for proof. He didn't try to calm her. He didn't say it would pass. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive, the one he had been preparing since the moment he knew Janet would strike below the belt. "Clara," he said softly, brushing her tear-wet hair back from her cheek. "Stay inside. Let me handle this." The next hour was war. Jimmy sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and uploaded the full archive. Every chat with Janet, dated, tracked, unaltered. Receipts, restaurant bills, apartment rent transactions, tuition money, photos of her at parties she claimed she never went to, screenshots of her telling friends that she was just stringing Jimmy along until Michael noticed her. And most damning of all, a confession she had sent to a friend 3 months before Jimmy's kidney surgery in the past life. "If he dies, at least I get the surgery for free." It hadn't meant much then, it meant everything now. He posted the thread. Title: The Truth About Janet, A Timeline of Deceit. He didn't add insults, he didn't scream, he let the facts speak. The post hit the forum like a tidal wave. Comments exploded. "She used him. This is sick. I called Clara names earlier, I'm so sorry. She manipulated both brothers." By sundown, #Justice for Clara was trending on campus boards. And then, the police got involved. Clara, with Jimmy beside her, filed a formal defamation report. The next morning, Janet was escorted from the student lounge by 2 officers. The entire room watched. Michael stood by the vending machine, frozen, coffee can in hand. Janet didn't resist. But when they reached the station and sat her down in the interview room, she still wore her old mask. "This is just a misunderstanding," she said, voice fragile. "I was hurt, I lashed out." Jimmy said nothing, not a word. Until the officer slid a paper across the table. "Mediation terms," the officer said. "Avoids escalation, victim agrees to settle." Janet glanced at Jimmy. "You really want to humiliate me like this?" He finally looked up. Calm, cold. "You think this is humiliation? I haven't even started." Janet swallowed. "You will pay Clara 5,000 yuan for emotional damages." She stiffened. "You will remove every single post from every platform." Her lip trembled. "You will issue a public apology, posted and pinned for 7 days." She looked down. "And you will cut ties with me and my entire family, permanently. You will never speak to my brother again. You will never attend our family events. You will never use my name again to build sympathy." Janet shook her head. "That's too far." Jimmy leaned forward. "No. Too far was accusing an innocent girl of being a homewrecker just because you couldn't handle being forgotten." Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. The officer asked, "Do you accept the terms?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." News spread before nightfall. Her apology went live. She admitted everything, the edits, the lies, the jealousy. The campus turned. Professors revoked her recommendation letters, clubs removed her from leadership, brands dropped her from promo roles. She became a ghost. And Michael, he said nothing, but he never looked at her again. Through it all, Clara stood quietly by Jimmy's side, her expression shaken but unbroken. At the end of the hearing, as they walked out of the building into the golden afternoon light, Clara touched his hand. "You didn't have to fight like that for me," she said. Jimmy turned to her. "Yes," he said, "I did." And he meant every word. Months passed, the scandal had died down, but the embers still glowed in whispers. Janet disappeared from campus life completely, her old friend circle now strangers, her name spoken only in regret. Clara and Jimmy had moved on quietly, focusing on their graduate school entrance exams. Side by side in libraries, tutoring sessions, and early morning study cafes. They had built something steady, gentle, earned. Then, one winter afternoon, Elise returned. But she wasn't the Elise the world remembered. She was gaunt, shoulders collapsed inward, hair chopped unevenly, brittle and thin from treatments. Her skin had a pallor that glowed grey under the sunlight, and her hands, scraped raw from the pavement, pressed flat against the glass door of Jimmy's office. She had walked there barefoot, bleeding. A secretary screamed. Jimmy opened the door. Elise dropped to her knees. Her voice was broken, no longer laced with seduction or control, just the voice of a sick girl who once thought the world revolved around her. "Please," she whispered, hands trembling. "I don't have a year left, the transplant list isn't moving, I've tried everything, I have nothing left." Jimmy stared down at her, and said nothing. She looked up at him, hollow eyes flickering with memory. "I was cruel, I used you, I don't expect forgiveness, just a kidney. You once loved me enough to give it." He didn't move. She lowered her head to the ground. "Please." The security guard approached, but Jimmy lifted a hand. "Let her be." Then he walked past her, out the door. At home that evening, Clara had just returned from class when she saw the blood on his shoes. "Was it her?" He nodded. Clara hesitated, then placed a warm cloth beside him. "If helping her will give you peace," she said quietly, "then do it. I'll support you." Jimmy looked at her, really looked, and shook his head. "You are my peace," he said. "Not a sacrifice I made in another life." He didn't donate. Janet eventually received a partial transplant from a cousin, but the surgery came with complications. The prognosis was clear: survival, yes, but never full recovery. She would live, but she would always be sick. Word spread quietly, some pitied her, most moved on. Jimmy didn't follow up, he never visited again. Instead, he and Clara took their graduate school exams together. They passed. At the graduation ceremony, Jimmy wore a slate gray suit. Clara, a soft blush dress. When their names were called together, he reached for her hand. Then, on stage, before the applause had faded, he knelt and pulled out a ring. Not extravagant, no glitter, just a slim band, engraved with a date only they remembered, the first time she sat beside him in silence and never judged the quiet. Clara blinked, surprised, but not overwhelmed. She whispered, "Are you sure?" He smiled. "I've been sure since you told me to let her go." They married the next spring. The wedding was simple, no photographers, no PR teams, just close friends, a blooming courtyard, and a slow piano echoing into the sky. But Janet came. Hair now cropped at the chin, a loose beige dress hanging from thin shoulders. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, like a ghost. Unsure if she belonged in the world of the living. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't try to cause drama. She just waited until the end, after the vows, the laughter, the speeches. When Jimmy stepped down from the stage, she approached quietly and handed him a red envelope. "Tradition," she murmured. He accepted it. She looked at him for the first time in years. No eyeliner, no lashes, just raw, tired eyes. "I'll never find someone who loved me like you did." Jimmy didn't reply. He turned and walked back to Clara. Clara touched his face, softly, palms warm on his cheeks. "You gave her your kidney in another life," she whispered. "But you gave me your heart in this one." Jimmy nodded, eyes locked on hers. "And that saved me far more," he said. They stayed like that, wrapped in a silence no one else understood. Behind them, the crowd cheered. Behind them, the past watched quietly, and let go.